Welcome. I'm so happy that you are here, that I'm just the warm-up act, if you will, that I just want to say some welcoming words, and then I'll turn it over to Larry Sidman for the formal introduction. But to have Ambassador Marc Ginsberg here, not just as a congregant, but also to share his insights, is really a very, very special treat. And I know that it's going to be a wonderful and provocative presentation, that what he has done throughout the region, and not the region of Montgomery County, but throughout the Middle East, is really so impressive. And you'll get to learn more and be able to engage with him shortly. That this falls within the context of a conversation and conversations we've been having throughout the congregation throughout the past year, that I know that for many of my colleagues, speaking about Israel is actually something that they are intimidated about and too often don't do. Whenever I'm at rabbinic conferences, I am always saddened when the question is asked, how often do you speak about Israel within your congregation? And honestly, my colleagues feel scared, for lack of a better word, scared, because they know that there is no way that you can have a conversation about what is happening, they believe, without getting someone upset. And I always encourage them, as long as you are getting everyone upset at some point, then you are actually unpacking the complexities of the region and doing your job as a leader of the congregation. So there are many things that are happening here within the congregation at Bethel related to Israel and related to the region, and I invite you to look for them, to come to them, and to come not to support your own viewpoint, but to come to be challenged, and to open your heart and to open your mind as to what the possibilities are. Because one thing is for sure, the status quo is not sustainable for the region for lots of different reasons, right? So I want you to come and to think deeply about the presentation tonight, that on February 11th, on Sunday morning, that Itzik, our Shaliach, who is wonderful, he and one other person, will be doing a presentation about the legacy of Yitzhak Rabin. So I invite you to come to that, as well as on April 15th, that Benny Morris will be here at Bethel and will be speaking here. Benny Morris, a well-known and controversial figure, so I hope that you come. I am sure any question you have, he has heard before. And so do not be shy tonight. Do not be shy at these upcoming events. So I want to turn this over to Larry Sidman, who is the chair of our Am Yisrael Chai committee, who is a wonderful partner in all of these things. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. We'll follow the rabbi and speak. Okay. It's the first time I've been told that I don't project loud enough. So as I want to reiterate Rabbi Harris's welcome, and just a few remarks about logistics before Ambassador Ginsberg begins his presentation. Following his prepared remarks, which are going to go for 30 or so minutes, the ambassador will take questions directly from audience members. So just please raise your hand if you have a question, and one of our committee members, John or Dan or Bob, will bring a mic over to you, and you can ask your question as opposed to giving your brief speech. We'll plan to conclude promptly around 9 o'clock, and thereafter everybody is going to be invited to a dessert reception in the Bender Social Hall directly behind the sanctuary. Tonight I'm privileged to introduce Ambassador Marc Ginsberg, the fourth luminary in our Israel Distinguished Speakers series. Our Rabbi Emeritus Bill Rudolph arranged for Marc to speak with us tonight and would have introduced him, but Rabbi Rudolph is out of the country. He assures us, however, that he will be streaming live tonight's event. For many years, part of Bethel's family, Ambassador Ginsberg's career has been a remarkable blend of deep commitment to public service and entrepreneurial vision. Marc Ginsberg spent his formative years in the Middle East, Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt, enabling him to acquire unique insights into the cultural and political life of the region. Marc commenced his government career as a national security legislative assistant to Senator Edward M. Kennedy. During the Carter administration, he served as the White House liaison to Secretary of State Cyrus Vance and as Chief of Staff to Special Envoy Avril Harriman. At the age of 27, Marc was appointed Deputy Senior Advisor to President Carter for Middle East policy and worked extensively on the Camp David Accords and Israeli-Palestinian peace initiatives. Following this initial period of public service and his graduation from Georgetown University Law School, Marc practiced international commercial and corporate law for more than a decade here in the U.S. and throughout the Middle East, specializing in bilateral infrastructure and commercial ventures. Of local interest, indeed just up the road, he became one of the co-founders of Sutton Place Gourmet, now better known to us as Balducci's. Marc was drawn back to the political sphere in 1992 when he served as deputy press secretary to President Clinton's 1992 presidential campaign. His public service career culminated, at least to date, in 1994 when President Clinton appointed him as United States ambassador to Morocco, a position Marc held for 4 years. He was the first U.S. ambassador of Jewish heritage to an Arab nation. A testament to his outstanding service as ambassador was his being knighted by the King of Morocco, the first U.S. envoy accorded this honor. For most of the past 2 decades, Marc has focused his creative energy in entrepreneurial endeavors linked to the pursuit of peace in the Middle East. Following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, he was co-founder and president of Lealina Arab Television Productions, the first U.S. Arab language television production company serving the Middle East. Its bipartisan board was chaired by former President George H.W. Bush. From 2013 to 2015, he served as the CEO of Peaceworks, a socio-entrepreneurial enterprise promoting reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. Currently, Ambassador Ginsberg serves as senior global counselor to the Counter-Extremism Project based in New York, whose mission is to intercept and facilitate the removal of radical Islamist incitement and other forms of extremist content from social media. Ambassador Ginsberg is one of the go-to Middle East experts for electronic and print media. In addition to coming here tonight, you can watch him almost any time of day on MSNBC, CNN, etc. He also testifies before the key House and Senate committees on U.S. foreign and national security policy in the Middle East. Ambassador Ginsberg has served our nation, the Jewish people, and the cause of peace with distinction and courage. It's my pleasure to present to you Ambassador Marc Ginsberg.
Boy, my mother would have been proud of that introduction. I'm proud of that introduction. I don't think anyone's given me an introduction like that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I usually sit in the back during the high holidays, and the cantor has been an inspiration for me for many years, as is has been Rabbi Rudolph and Rabbi Harris, and you all are part of the Mishpachah. I spent most of my formative years in the Middle East, particularly in Israel. My family helped found Kibbutz Mizgavam. If any of you have traveled up to the north, you know where Mizgavam is located. I asked Larry, what would you like me to talk about tonight? And he said, talk Arab. And Tarafi Arabi, I can talk Arabic, okay? Kifalak koyas. But I think I'll speak in Hebrew. Okay? But I will talk in English tonight. I have a PowerPoint presentation to talk to you about the Titanic struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia and its impact on Israel's security. If you can see in the back, God bless you, sein gesund. If you want to see more, please come down. Even in the middle of my presentation, we're a family here, and I'm going to get started, and we're going to start our orientation. Of course, you all know the map of the Middle East. You all are experts on the Middle East, okay? You know all about the Arab world. Fortunately, I've spent almost all my professional career in the Arab world. I go back to Israel because it's home. It's family and it's home. I have my sister-in-law, my nephews. Unfortunately, my brother was killed in the 2006 Lebanese war, and my mother's home was blown up on the kibbutz, and she died several months later in Israel. My family, I'm proud to say, were uber Zionists who have devoted and sacrificed a great deal on behalf of Israel. And my career was dedicated to understanding the enemies of Israel, and learn not only to understand them, but to also help Israelis and Americans understand the consequences of Israel's, this poor little country, facing all these adversaries. So let's start, give you a refresher course. A history of Saudi-Iranian relations. All of you know the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite, right? How many of you, of course, right? How many don't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shiite? Okay, well, I'm going to give you the cliff notes, all right? Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, died in 632 without an heir. And he left a family, his daughter Fatima, who was married to Ali, and he left his disciples. But he didn't designate an heir, okay? The family insisted that the family should inherit the mantle of this new religion that he founded, of which the Quran was granted by God to him. And they formed a party, a political party, to support their claim as the Khalif, the Caliphate. Khalif in Arabic means caliphate or successor in English. And they formed a party. The word in Arabic for party is Shia. And the son's name was Ali. And they combined the words and they came up with the word Shiite to describe the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad and those who claimed that Ali and his progeny would be the rightful heirs to the Prophet Muhammad. But then there were the disciples and followers of the Prophet who did not believe that he intended to bequeath the rights to this religion to his family. And they resisted Ali from becoming the Khalif or the successor. They studied the Arab portions of the Quran known as the Sunnah, and they became known as Sunni. And so the Shiite and the Sunni immediately contested the rights to claim the mantle of caliph or successor after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. They demanded, the Shiites demanded that they be designated as the heirs, and Ali's son, Hussein, fought a battle on the plains of Karbala in present-day Iraq in 680, and was killed. And so was born, in effect, this centuries-old schism between Sunni and Shiite, which has grown to such an antagonism that, thank God, us Jews are no longer the number one protagonist in the Middle East among the Sunni. If you go to Saudi Arabia, they'll tell you, oh, we don't care about the Israeli Jews. We hate the Shiite. Okay? Now, I'm giving you a very simplistic interpretation because in the theological sense, the differences between Sunni and Shiite are profound, but we only have about 20 minutes here tonight, and I can't get into it. Estimated distribution of Sunni Muslims in the Middle East, of course, you can see the deep oranges, and those are the main Sunni countries, as you probably know, in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia being the center of the faith, Mecca and Medina, with the Saudi royal family considered to be the defenders of the faith. And the blue, the dark blue, are the major Shiite countries in the Middle East. Iran. How many people believe here that Iran is an Arab country? Wrong, it's not. Iran is Persian. It's Farsi. It is not an Arab country. Iraq, of course, the second largest Shiite country in the Middle East, is Arab. And there are pockets of Shiite who live in Saudi Arabia, as well as in Yemen and Lebanon, and of course in Syria, which we will get to. So Saudi Arabia, country I've visited many times and have spent a lot of time in fact, I'm going back there in a couple of weeks. President Trump made a very historic visit to Saudi Arabia several months ago. And as you can see, if you can see in this photo, he inaugurated the new counterterrorism center in Riyadh with the president of Egypt, Al-Sisi, and the king of Saudi Arabia, Salman. And they were holding this orb to basically, when they put their hands on it, all the lights would light up to establish this beautiful, spanking brand new cyber terrorism, counterterrorism center in Riyadh. It sort of reminded me of Woody Allen in Sleeper. Okay, remember Sleeper? Okay. Trump's Saudi visit was meant to repair the damage in U.S.-Saudi Arabian relations, which the Saudis felt had been inflicted as a result of Obama's nuclear agreement with Iran. The Saudis were furious over this nuclear agreement. And Obama treated Saudi Arabia with a certain degree of contempt as a result of differences over a variety of issues. But it was that nuclear agreement with Iran that essentially caused this huge breach in relations. And President Trump went to Saudi Arabia and began repairing this relationship. Of course, you may ask, should we be repairing a relationship with Saudi Arabia for all the reasons that you and I know about Saudi Arabia? It's Wahhabism, it's support for terrorism, it's exporting of this deep, dark theological Islamic doctrine that has more or less incited terrorists to commit terrorism around the world, as well as the fact they don't like Israel, or at least many of them in the country necessarily don't like Jews. You know, when I go to Saudi Arabia and I put on my best Arabic, there's no difference that they distinguish between Israeli and Jew. You're a Yahud. So if you're a Jew, you must be Israeli. And if you're Israeli, you must be a Jew. And if you're an American who's a Jew, you must be Israeli. Now that's a simplistic. They're changing. Change is in the air in Saudi Arabia. The president also went to Saudi Arabia in order to lay the groundwork for the ultimate deal that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was going to begin helping to lay the groundwork and foundation for. He also just happened to sign an agreement for $100 billion, okay, 100 billion, not million, $100 billion in U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia, as if there's not enough arms lurking around the Middle East. Well, we're in the new age of transition in Saudi Arabia right now. There's a new crown prince in town, a new sheriff in town. In 2015, his father, King Solomon, assumed the throne. But King Solomon is not quite well as were most of the recent kings in Saudi Arabia. And in 1985, you do the math, Crown Prince Mohammed was born. Okay, makes him about 32, right? Young guy, 32, half my age. 2015, he was designated as the defense minister. And in 2017, the king designated him officially as the crown prince. And in 2017, you could have checked into the Riyadh Ritz, and you too could have been, shall we say, worked over for money that, shall we say, many of the corrupt princes have been absconding away in famous places around the world like Monte Carlo or London. This purge and anti-corruption drive that was started by the Crown Prince is winding down. You too can check today into the Ritz, the Riyadh Ritz, for only $680, but you may not come out unless you give $1 billion on the way out. There he is. I haven't met the Crown Prince, but he is turning everything over in the region, particularly in Saudi Arabia. This is the Crown Prince that is determined to modernize Islam inside his own country and the mores inside Saudi Arabia, and change the impact that Wahhabi theology has had on the monarchy and the control over its public. Is he visionary or is he careless? Well, at 32 years old, I would say that he necessarily lacks a certain amount of wisdom. These corruption arrests have been extraordinarily popular with the Saudi younger population. I mean, throwing Prince Talal into jail being the Ritz, the Riyadh Ritz, where allegedly he signed a release, get out of jail check for several $1 billion, is not lost on the Saudi population. And he's permitted women to drive. And he's doing other things. Movie theaters are opening up in Saudi Arabia. Now, you may poo-poo these changes. After all, we are who we are in the United States. But in Saudi Arabia, television, movies, driving, this is like Disneyland for the under 30 population in Saudi Arabia. They may even be able to commingle man and woman at the Riyadh shopping mall. He also has embarked on trying to wean Saudi Arabia off oil by promoting a new plan which I've studied and have been working on called Vision 2030. It is an extraordinarily ambitious plan to weed Saudi Arabia off of oil and promote investments to promote economic opportunity for the under 30 population, of which that is 52% of Saudi Arabia's population. Then there's Iran. And this is the heart of the matter. Why are they bitter rivals? Where did this all start? We all heard a few minutes ago about Sunni and Shiite, the divisions between the religions. But this really started, flash forward, in 1979, when the Ayatollah Khamenei seized power, overthrew the Shah. I was working in the State Department then. Not a pretty picture of how foreign policy was made by the United States. Taught me a great deal about how not to conduct foreign policy by the United States. In 1979, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned, overthrew the Shah, and by the way, just as a story, I was of all people given the task to be the courier from President Carter to the Shah when he was exiled to Panama and suffering cancer. When I write the book, I can tell you what he said to me, okay? Khomeini declared that the Saudi Arabian royal family, the Saud family, are illegitimate heirs to Islam as early as 1979. Now think about it. Those are them fighting words to the Saudi royal family to try to belie the entire legitimacy of their control over the holy places is in effect to deny their legitimacy over the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And in 1980, in return, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, KSA, that's the acronym, supported Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran, which many of you probably have some familiarity with, was one of the bloodiest conflicts ever waged in the 20th century. And of course, this 2015 Iran nuclear deal, the Saudis believed that this nuclear deal was a way in which the United States was going to, in effect, undermine Saudi leadership in the Arab world, undermine the Saudi legitimacy, play into the hands of Iranian provocateurs denying the legitimacy of the Ibn Saud royal family. And the list goes on and on and on insofar as the anger and resentment and fear that this Iran nuclear agreement would do precisely, in some respects, what it is doing, which is giving, in effect, a Tesla-type supercharge to the Iranian government to embark on adventures throughout the Middle East that put not only us but Israel, as well as Sunni Arab states, in great danger. So this is a battle for domination between the two countries. Legitimacy, I'm sorry, I'm walking back and forth here. Religious legitimacy, Sunni versus Shiite, control over oil resources, as well as, most importantly, Iran wants us booted out of the Middle East. They want to do everything they can to force American interest, American military, American business out of the Middle East, except to the extent that we invest in Iran and provide them what they need. And most importantly, they want to ensure that they have complete control over all of the terrorist proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and other terrorist organizations, including Shiite militias that run rampant right now throughout Syria and Iraq and Lebanon. That overthrow of Saddam in 2003 more or less set the stage for where we are today. Argue as you will, you can decide it, but to me it was one of the greatest disasters that the United States ever committed in the conduct of foreign policy since World War II, because it ushered in, for all intents and purposes, where we are today, and removed the natural enemy that was placing a check on Iran's expansionism interests throughout the region. And subsequently, and as a result, Iraq became a puppet of Iran. And in 2016, just to make things worse, the Saudis were furious with the Iranians as a result of Iranian interference in the Hajj, or the pilgrimage. And for good measure, they decided to execute the #1 Shiite cleric in Saudi Arabia. His name was Nimr al-Nimr. Not a big deal for you, huge deal for the clerics and the Ayatollahs in Saudi Arabia. So who supports whom in this battle? There they are in orange, Iran and Iraq. On the other side, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and there you go. I just happened to do a little tour of the region. I was in Oman, I was in the Emirates, I was in Saudi Arabia, I was in Jordan just a few weeks ago, as well as in Israel and Egypt. And I can tell you that the concern over where the region is right now as a result of this conflict is huge. Does that sound like the president? Yeah, huge. Okay. You can put the statistics up as to the military might between the parties, and don't worry about reading this, but suffice to say that Iran has far more military forces, but Saudi Arabia has a far more sophisticated air force, courtesy of the United States, in the event of a conflict. And everyone, there's academics in this town who spend a great deal of time wondering whether or not we're just around the corner from a war, an actual war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. But they are engaged right now in proxy wars. They're not fighting directly, they're fighting through their proxies. You all know that in 2011, the Arab Spring came to Syria. And the butcher of Damascus, Bashar al-Assad, the ophthalmologist, the one hope that Nancy Pelosi had to bring peace to the Middle East, that she said when she went to visit him, all roads to peace in the Middle East go through Damascus. Excuse me, Nancy. This map will show you how and who is in control of Syria right now. And I will show at the very top in the yellow are the Kurds. In the red is the government control that is regained by butchery, by chemical weapons attacks, by an unmitigated massacre against its own population. That is not to excuse, of course, the presence of radical Islamic criminals and terrorists that have committed similar atrocities, but nowhere near on the scale committed by Assad's regime, along with the connivance of the Russians and the Iranians. In the green, those green areas are still contested by the government of Bashar al-Assad. And on the very bottom, which we will get to, you'll see the Golan Heights. Let me go up here. And this area here, which more or less is now being contested, and while it may appear to be under the control of the Syrian government, it is actually under the control of Shiite militias, and increasingly by Hezbollah. I have to step back down here to click. That civil war more or less pitted a majority Sunni population of Syria against a very small minority dictatorship, Shiite dictatorship, which is the Assad family. And the Assads are even a small sect of Shiism known as Alawites. Alawites practiced Zoroastrianism and gazing at the stars before they adopted Islam. But the cauldron of Syria, the civil war of Syria that started in 2011, has blown the lid off of everything that we see going on and poses, in effect, set the stage, in my judgment, for the greatest threats that Israel faces today. Russia and Iran have rushed in, of course, to support Assad, who more or less, in the not-too-distant future, will be able to declare victory and vanquish his remaining opposition forces. And, of course, this all led to the acceleration of the rise of ISIS. And to the president's credit, he has devoted a considerable amount of effort with Secretary of Defense Mattis to take the handcuffs off of U.S. military to help defeat ISIS in Syria. But now we have a bigger problem. The people who helped us in Syria to defeat ISIS were the Syrian Kurds. And we are about to run the Syrian Kurds again under the bus because the Turks, where all things are local and anti-Kurd, are attacking our allies because they do not want the Syrian Kurds to be able to claim in any way, shape, or form autonomy or the right to, in effect, control territory. And they consider the Kurds to be allies of the PKK, the notorious outlawed Kurdish terrorist organization. It is really a witch's brew of sectarian strife right now in the region, in Syria. And then there's this other proxy war that is being waged between Sunni and Shiite in a country that most people, in fact, I would say Yemen is the only country in the entire Arab world I have not visited. And I'm sorry I hadn't had the chance to do so. I certainly wouldn't go there today. It is the ground zero for the worst humanitarian catastrophe since the civil war in Syria commenced. You hear in the stories on the media about cholera epidemics and medicine shortages and hospitals being bombed, et cetera, et cetera. There it is at the very bottom of the Arabian Peninsula. It's a big country. Don't let this map fool you. And up here, this is the area that was controlled by a small Shiite tribe known as the Houthis. But the Houthis were not happy with the central government's willingness to treat them with respect and give them control, autonomy over their region, and they decided to march on the capital of Sana'a and to launch, in effect, the civil war that has gripped this poor, catastrophic country for the last 4 years. And what happens when there's a failed state? Al-Qaeda and ISIS return. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, is the #1 threat to our homeland and security. It is from there that Anwar al-Awlaki, the cleric, the American-born cleric, who was ultimately taken out to his credit by President Obama in 2011, fled and began training the suicide bombers, the underwear bomber, the shoe bomber, the computer bombers. And Al-Qaeda has now seized a vast swath of the contested Yemeni territory while the Houthi rebels fight their opponents, who are the Sunnis, the majority Sunnis in the country. And again, I could spend an hour just talking to you about Yemen and where we are today, but I'm trying to give you, in effect, an overview. There is the Houthi-controlled territory right now here in green. This area is being contested by the Sunnis who do not want, who obviously are fighting the Shiite Houthi rebels who are getting support from Iran. And these rebels are getting all the support from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So arms are just pouring in to this country. This whole area in blue is under the control of Al-Qaeda. Under the control of Al-Qaeda. We know it. We have special forces there trying to battle them. But when the central government of Yemen fell, it made it exceedingly difficult for our special forces to operate in Yemen. This Shiite Houthi battle against the Sunni rebel alliance, or the Saudi alliance, is now at a point where it has overthrown the president of Yemen, and where no one knows from one day to the next who's in control of the country. In fact, the Houthis just turned on the former president, who decided to break with him and assassinated him, strung him up in the capital of Sana'a just 2.5 weeks ago. A bloody butchery type of situation in which the entire city was under attack, as if the rubble didn't need to bounce again. The atrocities that are being committed in Yemen by the Saudis, who are using their air force to pound the Houthi Iranian-supported rebels, have led to the point where the Houthis have brought Hezbollah in to help them, to train them how to launch Iranian missiles against Saudi Arabia. Did you hear about the Riyadh airport attack a few weeks ago, or in November, 2 attacks? Those missiles were provided by Iran to the Houthi rebels, who were then fired by Hezbollah trainees who came in, not trainees, but experts who came in to help the Houthi rebels fire those missiles into Riyadh. Iran's power play in Yemen is significant. It intends to make sure that the Houthi rebels prevail, because it would be the greatest nightmare for the Saudis to have an enemy Shiite country on their southern doorstep, on the Arabian Peninsula, having control over the most important waterway in the region, the Bab el-Mandeb, that connects the Red Sea with the Arabian Sea. And then we have the number one proxy war, the greatest threat that these wars have placed on Israel's own security, the proxy war in Lebanon with Hezbollah. You all are familiar with Lebanon to a certain extent. Here is Beirut. This entire area is under the control of Hezbollah. It is a state within a state. Hezbollah has been able to control almost the entire border area, all the way down to Israel's entire border area, which I will discuss. Now, this was as a result of the Israeli failure to vanquish Hezbollah in the 2006 war, in which a United Nations force was brought in to separate the two, but you and I know what happens when you deploy United Nations forces in the Middle East. They're totally ineffective, right? This Saudi-Iranian duel over Lebanon is the western wing of the Shiite crescent that the Iranians want to create, stretching from Tehran through Iraq, across Syria, all the way to the Mediterranean. A few months ago, less than a few months ago, Prime Minister Hafik Hariri, the son of the assassinated President Hariri, suddenly was forced to fly to Saudi Arabia and submit his resignation. Now, Mr. Hariri has made most of his money in Saudi Arabia and is very close to the Saudis and married a Saudi. But his summons by the Crown Prince, Mohammed, was to try to force a government crisis in Lebanon in order to try to force a realignment of political parties to try to minimize the influence that Hezbollah has over the Lebanese government. And it backfired. This is what I meant by the Crown Prince being perhaps clueless and clumsy and not full of wisdom. Because, if anything, the forced resignation of Prime Minister Hariri as the Prime Minister of Lebanon galvanized Lebanese against Saudi Arabia inside Lebanon and strengthened Hezbollah's hand inside this Lebanese government. Make no mistake about it. Hezbollah is a state within a state inside Lebanon. It has 20,000 terrorist forces deployed on Israel's northern border, another 30,000 situated inside Lebanon. Lebanon represents Iran's, as I said, western flank. That Saudi gambit has backfired, and now we're in a situation where almost the entire banking industry in Lebanon is under the control of Hezbollah. Many of you read the story a few weeks ago about Operation Cassandra. There was an effort by the Drug Enforcement Administration to take down a Hezbollah drug cartel in Latin America. Did you all know that Hezbollah makes most of its money selling drugs in Venezuela, in Brazil, and Paraguay? Did you know that the Venezuelan government is the number one source of financial support and training grounds for Hezbollah? Did you know that in Brazil, a significant number of the expatriate Lebanese community provides enormous financial support to be able to permit Hezbollah to buy drugs, sell drugs, launder the money through Lebanese banks into Beirut? That's what's going on. And it's dangerous because there's no way we have figured out how to stop him. And again, to Mr. Trump's credit, his Treasury Department has imposed new sanctions on Hezbollah operatives and money laundering. Where the hell was the Obama administration on this? I can tell you where the Obama administration is, and I say it as a Democrat. They were out to lunch, and they didn't want to do anything to upset the Iranians if they took on Hezbollah, including the money laundering operation, which, by the way, a significant portion of that found its way into the private bank account of the Ayatollah. Surprised? I'm not. Right now, the greatest security threat as a result of Hezbollah's participating in the Syrian war, getting more training, losing men, but getting more arms, is the fact that it has the largest missile arsenal directed against Israel of any country in the world. When I was in Israel in 2006 to bury my brother in the 2006 war, Hezbollah had perhaps 15,000 Katyusha rockets. Those rockets were like big firecrackers. You'd shoot them off. You didn't know where they were going to land, and of course they set fire to the northern Galilee, as well as blew up my mother's home, and I have no baby pictures left. So I don't know what I looked like when I was a kid. Maybe you can. You did a good job, though. And right now, Hezbollah has 120,000 sophisticated missiles aimed at Israel, and there's no Israeli defense. Not only is Hezbollah pose a major strategic threat, an existential threat to Israel, because they are the cat's paw. They are the lead army by Iran and the checkmate against any attack that Israel would want to launch against Iran's nuclear weapon program. Those missiles could destroy most of Israel's military capacity if they were fired off at once. And Iron Dome or David Sling, none of Israel's military capacity right now, offensive capacity or defensive missile capacity, can take down all of those missiles. And I study Hezbollah's military activities as well as its social media. And soon we'll be writing a book about this, about cyber terrorism being used by Hezbollah. Hezbollah, which means party of God in Arabic, now is developing a suicide drone army. Drones to be able to fire into Israel, as well as missiles. And Israel has done everything it could to try to take down many of these weapons that were transferred to Hezbollah. I had on my slide an attack on an operation called Camp 4000. It was a Hezbollah-Iran missile factory that was being built 25 miles between the Golan Heights and Damascus. And you can see here on this map the range of missiles that can be fired from Lebanon. And look, they can hit everywhere in Israel, except probably Eilat. Hezbollah, in my judgment, is the consequence of the Sunni Shiite divide that was started as a result of the revolution in 1979 and the consequences of what Israel faces in these proxy wars today. Hezbollah has virtual military control over the entire flank now of Lebanon as well as the Golan Heights area. And that's what really is troublesome to me. It was one of the great Israeli strategic failures to have taken Hezbollah out after the 2006 war. The United States is trying to tighten that noose against Hezbollah, but there's only so much you can do. And there's only so much that the Department of Justice can do against its money laundering in Latin America. So can the Sunni Arab states in Israel counter this Iranian threat? Can they be frenemies? Well, Israel and Saudi Arabia obviously share new common goals, obviously countering Iran's regional expansion in Middle East peace. And there is the potential for new security cooperation between Israel and the Sunni Arab states. And there is a new U.S. effort. The President unveiled a containment strategy in October to counter Iran that will include the Sunni Arab states in Israel. But make no mistake about it, unless there is movement on the Palestinian issue to cover the rear ends of the Sunni Arab states, you will not see public cooperation between the Sunni Arab states and Israel. Believe it or not, that Palestinian issue needs to be addressed in some way to give these countries more political cover, to deal more overtly with Israel. So the IDF is engaged in a social media campaign to convince Sunni Arab states that Iran is the great adversary. It's a new social media campaign that Israel has launched in the Arab world. So what are the whispers versus reality here? True, there is under the table intelligence exchange between Saudi Arabia and Israel, always going on, of course, with Jordan and Egypt in any event. False. There's no public engagement with Israel, although Saudi Arabia officially put out a statement the other day recognizing Holocaust Remembrance Day. First time. True, Israelis are now being interviewed by Saudi media. Interesting. False. There won't be any coordination at all on the Palestinians unless there is movement on the so-called ultimate deal that the Palestinians, of course, are very worried about. The defeat of ISIS, the destruction of the caliphate in Syria ushers in a whole new era right now for the United States and for Israel in the region, and what to do about that Shiite crescent. Iran's sinister plans not only include Lebanon and Syria, but we detected in the Counter-Extremism Project that Iran is training Palestinian operatives and Palestinian refugee camps to develop terrorist capacities against Israel's security forces. We know this, the Israelis know this. You may not have known this, but this is something that is now relatively public. The new Quds force is training those people on the West Bank. And there's a permanent deployment of Hezbollah and Shiite militia now outside the Golan Heights. That's the aim, for Hezbollah and Iran to be able to establish a permanent offensive military force on Israel's northeastern border across from the Golan Heights. And Iran has launched this project called Precision Project in Farsi that is a missile factory for high accuracy weapons and drones. And that's what Israel is trying to bomb and been bombing secretly for the last few weeks. So they're trying to encircle Israel on the northern front. Hezbollah is now trying to establish a naval base with Iran in the Mediterranean, air and military bases south of Damascus near Al-Qasira, which is only 50 kilometers from the Golan Heights. 100,000 Syrian and Hezbollah forces is what the Iranians want to assemble in Syria and along the Lebanese border with Israel, and to create a new Syrian Hezbollah in Syria. This map, as I wrap up, shows you this area where Hezbollah is trying to seize this entire territory from here all the way to the Mediterranean. Think about the consequences to Israel's security if that is happening. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, the defense minister, all issuing public warnings that Israel will not tolerate this, but good luck. Even Netanyahu is going to Moscow to try to convince Putin to put pressure on the Syrians to stop this. Good luck. What is the United States to do? Is containing Iran essential to U.S. security? I ask you. Should we be drawn into further Saudi-Iranian proxy wars in the Middle East? I ask you. And what can the United States do to help Israel versus Hezbollah? I ask you. The work of the Counter-Extremism Project is dedicated to trying to help our friends around the region to identify these threats and social media and to try to interdict the recruiters and those who provide the tactical support, not only in the region, but here to all of the social media platforms, Google, YouTube. All these lone wolves have been trained and incited by social media that is readily available to them on these platforms. And I've dedicated the rest of my professional career to try to get them to take that offensive, dangerous material off the air, because in the end, whether it be the suicide bomber who drove the truck down the bike path in Manhattan or tried to blow up the subway system in New York a few weeks ago, or the Orlando nightclub or the San Bernardino Community Center, they were all incited and online. They were all provided tactical instructions how to construct bombs, and all of that is readily available today on social media. Where's the outrage? That's the message I wanted to leave with you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Those of you who still have enough spirit after that to ask questions, I invite you to do so. People will take a mic around to you. So, Jerry first.
By the way, I just want to, I intended to scare you tonight. I intended to, because I want everybody to understand what I know and what I see going on, and the threats that I have been warning about for many years in the region. And I know that the Israeli government is well aware of these threats. But the American Jewish community needs to unite. The idea, if I just may get off my soapbox in 1 second, the idea that the support for Israel becoming a partisan issue in this country is extraordinarily dangerous. People who oppose Trump think that supporting Israel means supporting Trump. The support among Democrats for Israel's safety and security is dissipating. We have got to stop that. Israel's safety and security is a bipartisan issue, and that's why I feel so strongly about this.
Yes, my question is as follows. It seemed that their enemy was Saudi Arabia. Why would they care about Israel that much? Why would the Iranians, would it be just to gain power to then say we're the defender of the Arabs?
You know, all those people who support the Iran nuclear agreement, and by the way, I supported the Iran nuclear agreement because I didn't have any better alternative at the time. I think it's a horrible deal, but give me an alternative, okay? I wanted to know what we could do about the ballistic missile programs, about a regional strategy to contain Iran. Let me answer that question, because those people say, oh, this is all propaganda. They're really not determined to destroy Israel. That's just part of their effort to galvanize Sunni Arab support. You know, if I believe that, I got a bridge over the East River I'd like to sell you, because every day there is some leading Ayatollah, if it's not the son of a bitch himself, the big Ayatollah, who should drop dead, God bless us, hopefully tomorrow. Not that there'll be anyone better who will come after him. Constantly calling for the destruction of Israel, supporting Hezbollah, now supporting Hamas, which, by the way, is not a Shiite terrorist organization. They are doing everything to undermine Israel's security so that they can ultimately take on what they consider to be the United States' major proxy in the Middle East, which is Israel. Israel, to them, is the biggest adversary in their efforts to try to unify and create a Shiite crescent that would kick the United States out of the region. As long as Israel is there, they cannot accomplish their regional objectives. That's why. Look, there's plenty of theology behind this, but the tactical, strategic reasons why the Al-Quds Force and the Iran Revolutionary Guards spend fortunes supporting terrorist attacks against Israel is for a reason.
As a frequent traveler to Arab countries, what's your impression of the recent proliferation of pro-Zionist leaders going to Qatar and other Arab countries, and the Israeli government's, at least public...
Well, that's a hell of a question. You mean Alan Dershowitz and Mort Klein and all of these sort of right of center? Well, this is all part of an effort by Qatar, which is now in a real family feud with the other Sunni Arab states. You all know that, right? They've been sanctioned. Look, the government of Qatar, I say this to you again because I know, has been a major financier of the Muslim Brotherhood and terrorist organizations dedicated to Israel's destruction. They also have Al Jazeera. They also do other things to support Iran. They also provide the most important air base for the United States in the region. And they felt isolated from the support that Jewish community, including Trump, was giving to the Saudis. And so this is an effort to try to get, I guess, a buzz among the Jewish community that Qatar is nowhere near as bad as the Saudis and its so-called Israeli supporters and Jewish supporters in the United States make it out to be. Does that answer your question?
Are the Israelis separating themselves for a particular reason, or are they cooperating, or are the Zionist leaders playing into somebody's hands?
I think from the Israeli perspective, this feud between the Saudis and the other Sunni Arab states and Qatar is sort of an issue that we don't want to get ourselves into, and we benefit from sort of getting along with almost all of them if we can get them to go along with us. So that's sort of a very informal way of saying the Israelis are not choosing sides in this fight. Yeah.
I understood that you said that the Saudis don't care that much about Israel. They're really concerned about Iran. Is that mutual? Is Iran essentially concerned about the Saudis and not only secondarily about Israel?
I think they believe that everybody's their enemy. Look, Iran's not a country. It's a revolutionary cause. Anyone who thinks that this is a legitimate government that's operating legitimately in the region is wrong. This is a country that wants to foment revolution. It's like Lenin unleashed in the Middle East. It is a regime that is dedicated to overthrow, undermine anyone that it perceives to be and stand in their way in their regional and theological goals to be the dominant Muslim power in the Middle East and to restore their rightful place as the dominant player in the Middle East. Again, we can all go back and play history games here. So you ask which one is the worst of the two? In terms of the Iranian attitude, you know, the Shiite clerics in the holy city of Qum detest Wahhabism, detest the Saudis. They consider themselves to be the oppressed Muslims who deserve now to be free of the oppression that's been inflicted on them by the Sunnis, led by the Wahhabi Saudi royal family. Israel is sort of instrumental as part of, again, the issue of regional ambition to drive the United States out and to destroy the Jewish state, because it is the major impediment to them achieving their regional ambitions.
Yeah, you've outlined the goal of a Shiite encirclement of Israel. How are Fatah and Hamas, which are both not Shiite, likely to react to that? Would eventually Israel join forces with them to repel the Shiite encirclement?
It's a great question. Hamas has been, because Hamas has been isolated from the Egyptians, who cut them off from their Muslim Brotherhood supporters inside Egypt. You know, Hamas was a sort of the Boy Scout chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood created in the Gaza Strip. So it is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, dedicated, of course, to the destruction of Israel, along with the resurgence of the Muslim Brotherhood political agenda, which goes all the way back to the 1930s in Egypt. The issue here is that Hamas is willing now to accept money, just like frenemies, from the Iranians, support from the Iranians, because they've had so much of their aid and support and military cut off as a result of what President al-Sisi's done ever since President Morsi was kicked out of office. Now, on the West Bank, Fatah, the party, the dominant secular Sunni Palestinian party, considers Hamas to be a direct threat to them. So they are not joining forces with the Iranians. The Iranians are trying to undermine Fatah's own legitimacy, as if Fatah needs any more effort to undermine its legitimacy. After all, it's got a decrepit, moribund president in charge of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas, who should have gone a long time ago. And that's the real challenge here. There will be a huge vacuum of leadership in the West Bank when Abbas finally kicks the bucket. And the question is, he refuses to designate an heir. He's an autocrat. He's corrupt. He's in love with his own voice. His speech the other day after the president recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel was an atrocity against the Jewish people. And I say this as someone who knows Abbas and spent a lot of time. I probably know more about the Palestinians than most Palestinians in terms of my work there. But I'm the first one to say to my Israeli friends, I'm not so sure I'm in favor right now of you doing any deal with Abbas. Let's find someone who we can actually do business with. He's the last one we should be doing business with.
Someone over here. Hi, my question is back on Iran. Trump has issued some decertification and sort of kicked it over to Congress. I'm not quite sure what he's trying to accomplish. And two, I keep hearing stories like from CNN, the Fareed Sakara, who keeps claiming that Iran is more of a moderate, their government is more, vis-a-vis their Ayatollah is the moderate sort of force.
He's the biggest apologist on CNN for Iran, bar none. The biggest apologist for Iran. As indeed are other journalists who can't wait to get their visas, because that's the way they get their visas, to go to Iran to interview President Rouhani, et cetera. The fact is I went right after Fareed Zakaria, but you asked again? Oh, the decertification. Look, you know, the president came into office saying this was the worst deal ever, the worst deal ever. So he signed the first certification required under the Iran Nuclear Review Act, and then he refused to sign the second. And then he now is essentially asserting that he will pull out of the deal unless changes are made. And to his credit, I hate to say it, but to his credit, Nikki Haley and the president have done a good job now getting the Europeans who said they would never reopen negotiations. Never, never, never. And guess what? They're prepared now to consider how to put restrictions on Iran's ballistic missile program. When John Kerry, that great statesman, was negotiating the Iran nuclear agreement, he was falling all over himself to excuse and provide alibis why we could not force the Iranians to do certain things under this agreement, including holding them accountable under UN Security Council sanctions for their ballistic missile program. And John Kerry said he may want to run for president in 2020. Anyone here going to vote for him? I'm not. Okay. Yeah. Well, the Nikki Haley is certainly doing a hell of a job on that. Yeah.
The Democrats seem to be pissed off at Netanyahu for interfering, for going to Congress, talking about approving the whole deal. I mean, how do you correct that? I mean, is it inevitable?
When President Obama decided to turn a blind eye to that last Security Council resolution condemning Israel, you may recall that, that really was a bad move, not because of the substance we could argue about, but the fact that he was surrounded by a staff, foreign policy staff, that came to treat the Israeli-Obama relationship as a personality feud between Netanyahu and Obama, okay? Particularly this little pisher by the name of Ben Rhodes, all right, who was the #1 flinger of insults to the Israeli government, and whose brother runs CBS News, okay? I think the Democrats, look, I've been I support AIPAC. I support every organization that can do more to make sure that this is a bipartisan issue. The other day, I'm sorry to drag this on, Tony Blinken, a wonderfully decent guy who was Joe Biden's foreign policy advisor and Deputy Secretary of State under Kerry, was on TV on CNN with Wolf Blitzer. And Tony was asked about the Palestinians' anger over the fact that the president was threatening to cut foreign assistance to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, which I'm well familiar with because when I was working for Senator Kennedy, I did the first Senate report on 27 refugee camps around the Middle East. So I know the refugee camps, again, as well as anybody. Tony Blinken said, if the Israelis do not relent and make peace with the Palestinians, the entire Jewish state will disappear. The Jewish state will disappear, the demographics will force it to disappear. It was as if he was channeling John Kerry, who screwed up his Middle East peace process effort royally. The issue is to look forward for Democrats, to understand that Israel has a new potential strategic role to play with the United States in countering Iran, to helping to forge a new agreement with Sunni Arab states, to help fulfill our economic and military interests in the region. So we need to bring this relationship away from the Obama administration and all the idiots inside the Obama administration who are still angry at Netanyahu for not agreeing to stop settlements, and to start thinking about how we can bring this relationship away from personalities, back to where it belongs, as the essential, critical role that Israel plays in American safety and security, and the fact that it's still the only democracy in the region and the best friend that the United States can ever have in the region.
Question here. Yeah, how does apocalyptic thought, particularly among the Shiites, affect what they're doing and the timetable of anything they might do?
Well, it's a great question. It gets back to the theological differences. You know, the ISIS believed in the apocalypse. They believed that on the plains of Dabiq in northern Syria, there would be this major battle between the infidels, the United States, and ISIS, and Americans would be defeated. ISIS would then be able to claim Jerusalem from the Jews and restore the rightful ownership of Islam over Jerusalem. In a nutshell. Again, in a nutshell. I may be breaking a few facts here, but it's in a nutshell. Okay? By the way, evangelical Christians believe the same thing. We're only in 2 of their 3 acts, as you know. You all know that, right? Okay? Shiites believe in something similar. They believe there was 12 imams, and the 13th imam, a young boy, disappeared, and he's going to return to lead the Shiites to be able to restore their rightful ownership and heir over Islam and liberate Jerusalem from the infidels. So it's a similar, the Christians, evangelical Christians have this Armageddon rapture theory. ISIS had also this rapture theory, and the Shiites with their imam, 13th imam, also have this theory. So choose your weapon, my friends, which one you want to deal with.
Yes, we get a lot of what you have said here, but to me, you just made the case that there should not be a 2-state solution. It seems to me there's already 22, not only me, but a lot of people, there's already 22 Arab states. Now you're going to have a 23rd Arab state. Israel is going to have problems controlling it with all the problems in there. Why don't we just not give up the idea of a 2-state solution? It's a mistake at this time, in a million years maybe, but it's just not going to work. And I don't understand why there's a reticence of people to come out and actually support those settlements, which are there for the defense of Israel, and why we have to tolerate organizations like J Street and all these problems. So I did ask you the
I
question.
hear your question.
Are you willing to go out and,
Further,
are
sir,
you going?
You've gone further than a question, so let me answer your question.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, the question is, should there be a two-state solution, in a nutshell? Now, let me tell you, okay, when I worked for Jimmy Carter, not that I was just a young man working for Carter, I happened to think that a two-state solution was in Israel's interest, and every American Secretary of State, from Kissinger all the way to John Kerry, said, I'm going to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict. I will get my Nobel Peace Prize. Okay? When once upon a time there were Palestinians and Israelis who were commingling with each other before the terrorist attacks in the late 90s. I was in Morocco as ambassador when Rabin and Peres were welcomed by Arab leaders. There was hope in the air for a two-state solution. Rabin was considered by the Arabs to be the man who would bring peace to the Middle East. The assassin knew exactly what he was doing when they killed that prime minister, that wonderful man. Okay? The fact is that ever since that assassination, the Oslo Accords have gone off the rails. Efforts at Camp David II have gone off the rails. For one reason, I say in one reason, and I say this as someone who is never going to absolve the Israeli government of its own liability and responsibility for creating a good part of this mess, with all due respect. I'm someone who was raised in Israel, and I will call it out as I see it. I'm not afraid to call Israel out when I believe it's wrong. But the fact of the matter is that the cohabitation and hope and expectation that Israelis and Palestinians would find common ground with each other, those days have dissipated, and they've dissipated significantly. The green line, the barrier that's been constructed now has separated the populations almost completely. There's anger and resentment that has grown on the West Bank. Support for a two-state solution has also devolved on the West Bank as much as in Israel. And it's going to take a Messiah to get both popular support in Israel and Palestinians to think that a two-state solution represents the best solution for peace in the region. Now, everybody knows what a final status agreement looks like. We all know there won't be much refugee return. They'll be able to put a flag on a building in East Jerusalem in a neighborhood where no Jews even live, much less go, and call it their capital. We all know that there's what the final borders look like with changes that would occur left and right in terms of Ma'ale Adumim and the Gush Etzion bloc exchanging for territory for the Palestinians. We all know that there would be Israeli military left on the Jordan River. But guess what? Guess what? That doesn't make a solution anymore. Final status does not solve the underlying enmity that has grown between the two peoples in the last 10 years. And that's what concerns me, and that's why I'm so reticent about pushing a two-state solution now. We all know what the papers say about a final status. Oh my God, the diplomatic industrial complex of the Middle East hums in Washington, coming up with newfangled ideas to solve the problem. The best idea I've heard yet, and why I'm supporting it, as crazy as you may think I may be, and I am crazy at times, is that all of our friends who have devoted their life careers to peace in the Middle East, God bless him, Martin Indyk and Dennis Ross and Aaron David Miller and all of the Secretary of State and staff among them, all believed, along with Clinton and Kerry and all the rest of them, that they could negotiate with the Palestinians and Israelis and bridge their differences. Trump and his son-in-law believe, throw out the old playbook. The only way we're going to have peace between Israel and the Palestinians is if there's a true, lasting peace between Israel and Arab states who ultimately will compel the Palestinians to finally stand up and accept the compromises that they must make, which they have refused to make. You know the reason why Arafat did not do a deal with Ehud Barak? Because he was a coward. He was a coward. He could never, ever get in front of his own people and say, we must make these compromises with the Jews. And Abbas is just as bad. There's no Palestinian leader that has stood in front of their public and given a speech like Sadat did in Jerusalem and declared, this is what we must do in order to have our state. We must compromise. You must learn to compromise. When I hear a Palestinian leader stand up and say to his people in Arabic, we must learn to compromise with the Jews, with the Israelis, I will say, hallelujah. Until then, I'm not so sure about a two-state solution.
Okay. وقتی شکران الأستاذ أنت مظبوط.
Arabic is terrific.
All right. A preface, I want to say that this was one of the most enlightening speeches in terms of not only such a thorough understanding of the facts, even more so, understanding of the driving mentality and culture which is integral to all of these conflicts, was absolutely off the wall, unbelievable.
Well, thank you. And that's all because I can thank my great Rabbi Bill Rudolph for that.
Okay.
That's my inspiration here.
To the questions. There are bases now for finding common interests, such as the oil fields. Israel has relaxed some of the agreements in the Sinai for military to allow the Egyptians to fight those fighters. I'm hoping that you would comment on some of the security issues that we have in common. It also may extend, as missiles were fired at the capital in Saudi Arabia, that they may have an interest to get some of Israeli technology for defense against missiles. The second question is the one outlying group of people, how can we support the Kurds, which has been a major force and helpful force, and a force that we can count on in that conflict? The other parts with respect to the mentality, which I said before, you understand the Arab mind. You understand what's going on. When Americans and other people view it, they project their value and culture system and assume they must be just like us, but they speak a little funny.
Okay. Let me answer your question. Well, it's 9 o'clock, so I will wrap it up on that basis. First of all, there's so much, the Mossad and the Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence services, and you can read these books that are written by their former leaders about the cooperation that they've had with Arab leaders and Arab states, going back to the King of Jordan, King Hussein. And now there is so much intelligence sharing that is going on. I do not have a security clearance. I cannot tell you that I am privy to all of the intelligence that the Israelis are sharing. But I'll give you an example. The capture of the computers that ISIS held outside of Raqqa, where the United States Special Forces landed a few weeks ago and were able to take out a bunch of ISIS fighters and capture their hard drives, was because of Israeli intelligence. Okay? The Russians were grateful and expressed their gratitude to the Israelis, who also helped them identify a suicide bombing threat along with U.S. intelligence that was going to be directed at St. Petersburg a few weeks ago. in Saudi Arabia. There's no doubt in my mind that there's so many Israelis that are going in and out of Dubai that you almost needed to open up a falafel stand in Hebrew. Okay? Yeah, well, there's so much that is going on under the surface with Jordan, with Egypt, particularly of ISIS attacks in the Sinai Peninsula, which have been horrific, horrific. Cooperation against Hamas, cooperation with the Emirates on a variety of issues involving Yemen. God bless the Israeli intelligence services. They can screw up once in a while like they've done, and you've heard about it. But for every time you've heard about it, there's 1,000 times they've succeeded. The best part about this is that the Americans and the Israelis and the Arabs are working far more closely together. And that's as a result of Mr. Trump, not because of Mr. Obama, although Mr. Obama did provide enormous amount of intelligence and military support to Israel, despite all of the differences between the two countries. And you can't deny that because the facts speak for themselves. He's the one president, by the way, that did not let his disagreements with Israel get in the way of military assistance. Ronald Reagan did, George H.W. Bush did. I wrote an article about this. Not that I want to give Obama a pass, but you got to, I go by the facts. The facts are that Israel right now is whether it's providing water supplies to Jordan, whether it's now providing natural gas supplies to Egypt, new agreements as a result of them becoming self-sufficient. God, finally, they're so self-sufficient in energy. Moses was right in the end. Right? Later.
You mentioned several times tonight how John Kerry screwed up the negotiations with Iran. Trump is making the same claim. But it wasn't just John Kerry. There were 7 major nuclear powers negotiating against Iran, trying to stop you said it's not even a country, a crazy bunch of guys from getting a nuclear capability. You think that our only hope is Trump to solve that?
I didn't say that. I said that I want to see a bipartisan, look, there's bipartisan support in Congress. Hold on a second. There's bipartisan support in Congress to fix parts of this deal that need to be fixed. President Macron of France, Vive la France, declared when President Trump visited him in Paris that he believed that the Iran nuclear deal needed to be fixed. So I don't agree with your premise. There are countries that signed on to this agreement, but President Macron was not president when his predecessor signed that deal. There's very few leaders in the region who, by the way, I'm talking about in Europe, or the signatories, who disagree with my position, don't talk about Trump, that the agreement needs improvement in order to prevent Iran from rushing at the end of 8 years to develop a nuclear deal. It needs to open up its military bases, and it needs to stop its ballistic missile program. If President Macron, vive la France, vive Monsieur Macron, who laid out this in a policy speech in Paris a few weeks ago, I support Mr. Macron 100%. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So on behalf of everybody here, again, thank you so much. It was a tour de force, Yashu Koach. And for those of you who are asking, what can you do? Okay, I have a simple suggestion, okay? Everybody go home, write your member of Congress or the Senate, and say they should do a 1-hour briefing, not a hearing where nobody has any time to ask any questions. It's all for show. 1-hour briefing with Marc Ginsberg, okay? And maybe we'll make some progress.
I have any business cards if any of you
Yasher Koach. And there is food.